Good day, doctor. My name is Rituparan Murugan. My matrix number is 299374. We are from group 5 and we will be presenting about the question that was given to us, which is discuss the origin of neoclassical school and state 3 extension of economic analysis by that school as compared to earlier classical and marginalist school, and explain how Alfred Marshall neoclassical school combined the idea of Adam Smith classical school and William Stanley Jevons marginalist school to further explain the theory of value, market prices and of goods and services from chapter 5, 13 and 14. Now we look at the origin of neoclassical school. The microeconomic thought of marginalists was transformed into neoclassical economics. Neo means new, which means neoclassicism implies new form of classicism. The neoclassical economists were marginalists in the crucial sense that they emphasized decision making and price determination at the margin. Neoclassical school is quite unique compared to other schools of economic thought discussed earlier because they did not have 5 major questions. They draw on the ideas of their predecessors, classical and marginalists, and develop them further. The greatest figure in neoclassical school is Alfred Marshall. The extension of economic analysis by the neoclassical school compared to classical and marginalist school. Neoclassical stresses both demand and supply in determining the market prices of goods, services and resources, which means classical stress on supply alone, marginalist stress only on demand, value theory. Secondly, several of the neoclassical economists, for example, Wicksell and Fisher, took a far greater interest in the role of money in the economy than did the earlier classical and marginalists in monetary economics. Neoclassical economists extended marginal analysis to market structures other than pure competition, pure monopoly, and duopoly, imperfect competition market. The focus of this assignment is discussing the biography and contribution of Alfred Marshall in developing the ideas of neoclassical school. Secondly, comparing the views of Adam Smith from classical school, William Stanley Jevons from marginalist school, and Alfred Marshall from neoclassical school on the theory of value, market prices of goods and services. We also would like to know how these economists responded to the following questions. Firstly, do pearls have value because of people die for them, or do people die for pearls because pearls have value? Now we will be looking at the biography of Alfred Marshall. Alfred Marshall was born on 26th July 1842 at Bermondsey, London, England, and died on the 13th of July 1924. He was the greatest figure in the neoclassical school. Marshall was the son of a cashier in the Bank of England. His father overworked him at studies, made him promise to never play chess again because it was wasting time, and tried to banish maths from the boys as it was irrelevant to the ministry. Young Marshall rejected a scholarship from Oxford, instead attended Cambridge University where he devoted himself in the field of maths, physics and economics. He was aided by a well-to-do uncle because his father simply been so poor to pay for his tuition when he gave up on a scholarship. He was a hypochondriac, which means very concerned about his health, and hypercritical about his writing, which means over exacting. He threw much of what he wrote into the waste bucket, and in fact, many of his major ideas were worked out a decade or more before they appeared in the Principle of Economics 1890. Marshall criticized Jevons, the figure of marginalist school, for rushing into print before it was ready.
Next, I'm going to explain about Alfred Marshall's contribution. First, Marshall popularized the modern diagrammatic approach to economics that helped elucidate certain fundamental principles. Second, Marshall was a great synthesizer. He combined the best classical economics with marginalist thinking, hence producing neoclassical economics. Next, he believed that chief task on economics is elimination of poverty. So there is a need to improve the living condition of the poor and reduce poverty in society. Economists should ensure that economic growth benefit everyone, especially the underprivileged. contrast with classical economists who were less focused on the social aspect of economic growth. Next, Marshall attempted to merge theoretical, mathematical, and historical approaches, reflecting a broad and balanced view of economic analysis. He acknowledged the utility of mathematics but warned against over relying on it. He believed that economic insight could be lost if the mathematical formalism overshadowed the practical understanding. Marshall defined his subjects as political economy or economics in a study of mankind in the ordinary business of life. It examines that part of individual and social action which is most closely connected with the attainment and with the use of the material acquisite of well-being. Next, he also stated that economists work like scientists. They collect, arrange, interpret, and draw conclusions from facts. They seek knowledge of cause and effect relationship. Economy is a tool or method for finding out the truth that help to understand through investigation and reasoning. The foundation of economic analysis is to study on how one thing affects another in the economy. For this section, we will then discuss and compare the idea theory of value from three different perspectives, which is from Adam Smith, that is from classical school, William Stanley Jevons from marginalist schools, and Alfred Marshall from neoclassical school. For Adam Smith, he has observed the diamond water paradox. And he observed why water is essential to life is cheap, while diamonds which are not essential to life are expensive. Smith also observed that there are two kinds of value, which is value in use that refer to water and value in exchange that refer to diamond. So value in use refers to the utility or usefulness of a good or services provided to a consumer. The things which have the greatest value in use have frequently little or no value in exchange. For example, water. And for value in exchange refers to the worth of a good or services in the term of its market price. The things that which have the greatest value in exchange have frequently little or no use in value. For example, diamond. For Smith, he did not solve the paradox of value because first, missing concept of marginal utility. The key insight is that value depends on marginals, which is how much extra value of a single additional unit provides, not total utility. Secondly, he focused more on labor theory of value. Smith mostly explained value in terms of labor required to produce good. Because of that, Smith directed his attention toward exchange value. And Smith furthered the discussion of the theory of value in primitive society and advanced economy.
Good day, doctor. My name is Chun Ming, and my mention number is 297XX1. I'll now talk about the Adam Smith's labor theory of value. In primitive society, labor was the only resource available. The relative value of a good was determined by the amount of labor required to produce it. This means that the value of the commodity to its owner is the use for exchange equal to the amount of labor that purchase or command. So we look at the Swiss example, it is about the deer and beaver. Suppose that it takes 2 hours to track a beaver and 1 hour to hunt a deer. So to exchange the value of beaver is either 2 deers or 2 hours of labor. This means that a beaver can be exchanged for 2 deer since that each deer only takes 1 hour of labor to obtain it, or the beaver can be used to command 2 hours of labor service. However, as the society evolved and capital accumulated, Smith recognized that a simple labor cost theory is not enough in the complex economy because the real price of goods should be determined by also the wages, rent, and profit. This means that profit depends to the total capital invested by the employer. Adam Smith emphasized the supply of or the cost of production as the determinant of exchange value. And now I'd like to touch on the very interesting question about the value of beers. So, do beers have the value because of people need to dive intensive for them, or people dive for beers because the beer have value? According to Adam Smith's opinion in the classical economy, the beers have a value because people need to dive for them. It's related to the cost of production determine a goods exchange value or the price. And now we will look at how the concept of marginal utility can solve the diamond water paradox. As we know that the total utility refers to the total satisfaction a person receives from consuming a quantity of good, and the marginal utility refers to the additional utility a person receives from consuming an additional unit of a particular good. So now we look at the two diagrams in this slide. So it is about the law of diminishing marginal utility, which means that after we consume a particular quantity of goods, the marginal utility will not much increase and it will become zero or negative. In the diamond water paradox, the total utility of water is higher than the diamond because the water is extremely useful, but the diamond is not. And there's a question come up. If the total utility of water is greater than the diamond, why is the price of water is higher than the diamond? To solve the question, we must know that the price does not reflect to the total utility but marginal utility. As marginal utility of water is less than the marginal utility of diamonds, so we know that the marginal utility of water is low because it is plentiful, but the diamond is scarce. As the result, after, when the people consuming an additional unit of water, it will give less utility than the next unit of diamond. So people will later have an additional diamond than an additional unit of water given large store of water.
Assalamualaikum and very good morning to everyone. My name is Nur Farhanhiza binti Asmat, metric number 300615. Today, I'll be presenting about one of the most important figure in economics, especially in neoclassical school. My friends has already given introduction in the beginning about neoclassical school, which is the greatest figure in the neoclassical school is Alfred Marshall. So today I'll be focused on explain how Alfred Marshall in neoclassical school combine the idea of these two figures. I'm pretty sure we already know about these two figures as and Dr. Lim in class has given an introduction about classical school, Adam Smith's, and marginalist school, William Stanley Jevons. So yeah, to make it easy, I will divide this into three. Let's go. I would love to begin with one of Marshall's most famous contribution, which is the Caesar metaphor. Marshall argued that it's misleading to say that only supply or only demand determines price. Nah. Instead, he said, price is like a pair of scissors. Both blades are needed to make a cut. One blade represents supply based on cost of production, as we all know, an idea from classical economics lies like Adam Smith's. So the other blade represents demand based on the marginal utility, which is we all know also an idea from Jevons, the marginalist school. So, the market price, according to Marshall itself, is found where supply and demand intersect. So, this metaphor reflects his larger theme that price is never one-sided. It's always a result from both forces working together. Secondly, is about
time period, which is how Marshall introduced the idea of using different time frames in economic analysis. So the first point is in short run. Some inputs like factory size especially are fixed, so supply cannot adjust quickly, and the price is mostly influenced by demand or marginal utility, like Jevons believed it. And then second point is long run. In the long run, everything can change. Firms can expand or exit a market. So that is when price reflect the cost of production, following what Adam Smith's view. So here's the Marshall's key insight was that both Jevons and Adam Smith were right, but in different time frames. So this will help us separate the temporary price shock from long-term period or trends. Lastly, for example, if there's a sudden sugar shortage, for example, so price will rise fast. So that is the short run. But over the time, more firms will enter and the price stabilize in the long run period. To further explain about the theory of value, let's begin by Marshall explained the market price of goods and services by combining these two big ideas, which is Adam Smith's cost of productions and Jevons' marginal utility. So he said first, set where marginal utility is equal to marginal cost, where demand and supply are met together. So the first one, Marshall believed in the law of diminishing marginal utility. The more you have of something, the less of extra satisfaction you get. So I believe we all know about this theory. So before we go further to the example, I will explain one by one the definition of theory that we need to know. So, and the second one, you also said that the best in the short run, and with goods you can't divide easily, for example like a meal or a pair of shoes. So this one about the law of diminishing marginal utility. So to make utility measurable, how? So Marshall's flipped the usual idea. Instead of utility causing a spending, he said we can measure this utility by how much you are willing to pay. So for example, if you are happy to pay 40 ringgit for shoes and 20 ringgit for the hat, maybe, so it means shoes give you twice the utility. So that's to make it clear. And the last definition of theory we need to know is introduce the equimarginal rule, which is we spend more money where we get the most value per ringgit. So until it's balanced across the choices, we'll spend until it's balanced. So it's about the theory before we go further to the example. Last but not least, in this slide, I will make an example and summarization. So imagine you're buying a bottle of water maybe at a convenience store, right? So first point here, from the producer side, the price must cover all of the cost of production. So maybe the plastic bottle, water, labor, transportation, and maybe profit. This is the supply side, which is reflect the Adam Smith's classical idea. But from the consumer side, for example like me, do I really want to pay this 2 ringgit 50 cent for this water? So that depends on how useful or satisfying it is to me. So maybe I'm very thirsty, so that is we call as the marginal utility is high. So this reflects Jevons' marginalist view. Hence, according to the what Marshall said, which is the final price 2 ringgit 50 cent is set where your willingness to pay matches or equal to sellers need to cover the cost. So that is where marginal utility equal marginal cost, the market price. Lastly, to summarize, Marshall didn't choose between Adam Smith's or Jevons. He brought them together, and then in doing so, he created a more complete or understanding on how value and price really work. That is all from me. Thank you.
Law of demand follow directly from the notion of diminishing marginal utility and rational consumer choice. Marshall had clear concept of difference between the change in quantity demand that we measure along the horizontal axis and the change in demand that shift of the entire curve. Based on his theory of demand, he assumed that the purchasing power of the money are constant. For example, when P of X fall, two effects are worth that increase the quantity purchased, like substitution effect dan income effect. Consumer surplus is the difference between the total expenditure consumers are willing to pay and what they need to actually pay. Marshall have stated that the total utility of a good is the sum of the successive marginal utility of each added unit. The price of person pay for a good not excess and seldom equal which consumer willing to pay rather than go without a desired object. Elasticity of demand. Formula of the elasticity of demand is the percentage change in quantity demand divided by percentage change in the price. For example, when ED more than 1 is elastic, but when ED less than 1 it is inelastic. And lastly, when ED equal to the 1 it is unit elastic. Supply. Marshall said supply is determined by the cost of the production. Marshall have divide supply into the three periods: first, immediate present, short run, and the long run. Immediate present refer to time frame that is too short. Quantity supply cannot be increased in response to a suddenly increase in demand and cannot decrease immediately in a response to a decline in demand because it takes time to be reduced. The market supply curve is perfectly inelastic. For the short run, it is defined as the period during which the variable input can be increased or decreased, but fixed cost cannot be changed. Short run have divided by two. First, supplementary cost that fixed cost that cannot be changed in whether level of production. One cost is the variable cost that can be changed directly followed by the production. In the short run, supply curve is based on variable cost. Variable costs are slope upward and from the left to the right. The higher the product price, the larger is the quantity supply. And lastly, long run, that all costs are variable and they must all be covered in the firm is to be continued in a business. The increase in price that cause total revenue exceeds total cost of production. For the new firm that enter the market, if the price fall below the average cost, capital will reduce and probably the firm will exit the industry. Supply is seen in the term of finance and subjective cost. And for the demand, based on utility and diminishing marginal utility.
I will explain about periods of production, inputs and costs. For a short run, the input used is fixed and variable. The cost associated with inputs is fixed costs and variable costs. For short run, definition of cost is fixed cost that does not change as output changes. For variable cost, the cost that change as output changes. In the long run, input use just variable. And variable means costs that change as output changes. Hello, my name is Nur Sarah Sofiani Azhari and my metric number is 291239. Alright, I will continue this presentation. Alfred Marshall, a famous economist, explained equilibrium in a market as the point where demand equals supply. According to him, the price of a good is determined by the interaction between its demand from consumers and supply from the producers. When the demand is equal to supply, the market is said to be equilibrium. At this point, the equilibrium price is set and the equilibrium quantity is exchanged. If the price is higher than the equilibrium price, supply will be more than demand, leading to excess supply or surplus. Producers will then lower the price to sell off the extra goods. If the price is lower than equilibrium price, demand will be more than supply, leading to the excess demand or shortage. Buyers will compete for the limited goods, pushing the price up. This adjustment process continues until the market reaches a stable point where there is no tendency for price to change. This is the equilibrium. Marshall viewed both demand and supply as equally important in price determination. He compared it to two blades of a pair of scissors. Both are necessary to cut. Similarly, both demand and supply are necessary to determine equilibrium price and quantity. Alright, let's visit about Marshall market balance. Imagine a bustling marketplace where sellers offer their goods and buyers look to purchase them. Economist Alfred Marshall explained that the price in this market doesn't just appear randomly. Instead, it's determined by the push and pull of supply, means how much sellers offer, and demand is about how much buyers want. Think of it as like a seesaw. If the price is too high, sellers offer a lot, but few people want to buy, creating a surplus. The weight on the supply side is heavier, pushing the price down. Conversely, if the price is too low, many want to buy, but the sellers don't offer much, leading to shortage. The demand side is heavier, pushing the price up. Through this constant haggling and bargaining, the market naturally finds a balance point. This equilibrium occurs where the quantity sellers are willing to sell exactly the match the quantity buyers want to buy. In our example, this happens at a price of 36 with 700 units exchanged. This point of balance is what Marshall identified as market equilibrium, where both buyers and sellers are satisfied and the market are clears. Okay, now we will take a look with this visual guide, the market balance. Imagine a graph as a simple marketplace. One line slopes upwards, representing supply. As price rise, sellers offers more. Another line slopes downward, showing demand. As price fall, buyers want more. Where these lines intersect is the magic spot. We call it as equilibrium. At this equilibrium point, both buyers and sellers are content. The price is just right, and the quantity available match the quantity desired. It's a balance where everyone wants to buy can and everyone wants to sell can. But there is more. The area around this equilibrium point reveals extra benefits. The space above the equilibrium price but below the demand line represents consumer supplies. These are the happy buyers who were willing to pay more but got a bargain. The space below the equilibrium price but above the supply line represents producer supplies. These are happy sellers who are willing to sell for less but got a better price. In short, this graph shows how the market, through the introduction of supply and demand, finds a balanced price and quantity. It also highlights the extra value of our supplies that both buyers and sellers enjoy in a well-functioning market. Marshall market wisdom. Alfred Marshall, a key economic thinker, showed us that prices are not set by just one thing. Instead, it's a balance between what buyer want, there is demand, and what seller offer, there is supply. Demand comes from how useful or enjoyable something is, while supply depends on how much it costs to make. Both forces together determine the price we see in the market. Marshall also pointed out that in a healthy market, both buyers and sellers often get a little extra. Buyers might be willing to pay more but get it for less consumer supplies, while sellers might be willing to sell for less but get more producer supplies. These supplies are benefits of the market working well. He also used simple graph to illustrate this. Imagine two lines crossing, one showing how much sellers offer at different price, there is supply, and the other showing how much buyers want at a different price, there is demand. The point where they meet is, we call it as equilibrium price and quantity. To explain value, Marshall used the example of pearls. Are they valuable because diving for them is hard? Or do people dive because pearls are valuable? He said both. The effort to get them, there is, we call just at supply, and people desires for them, that is what we call demand. Both contribute to the worth of the pearls.
So for the conclusion part, Smith introduced the labor theory of value, which suggests that the value of a good is based on the amount of labor required to produce it. In primitive society, where only labor is used in production, this theory works well. But in advanced economic, Smith acknowledged that price must also cover wage, rent, and profits. He discussed the difference between value in use and value in exchange, but could not fully explain why some essential goods are cheap and non-essential are expensive. His approach was supply-side focused. The value of a good was determined by how costly it was to produce. Jevon introduced the marginal utility theory of value. Value depends on the satisfaction and individual gains from the last unit consumed. He explained the diamond water paradox by showing that although water is essential, it has a low marginal utility because it is abundant. Diamonds are scarce, so their marginal utility is high, which justifies the higher price. Jevon shifted economic towards consumer-centered thinking and introduced the concept of diminishing marginal utility. The more you consume, the less additional satisfaction you get. His approach was demand-side focused, emphasizing personal preference and decision-making. Marshall synthesized the idea of Smith and Jevons, arguing that value is determined by the interaction of supply and demand. Using the scissor analogy, he showed that both marginal utility and cost of production are essential for determining price, like both blades of a pair of scissors are needed to cut paper. He also introduced key tools still used in economics today: price elasticity, consumer surplus, and partial equilibrium analysis. Marshall added a time dimension, noting that in the short run, price is more influenced by demand, but in the long run, cost of production become more important. His work created the neoclassical school, forming the foundation of modern microeconomics. For the overall conclusion, the journey from Adam Smith to Jevons to Marshall represent more than just a sequences of economic thinkers. It marks a transformation in how we understand value, price, and market. From objective to subjective value, Adam Smith laid the groundwork by focus on objective cost, especially labor, as the source of value. His model worked in a time when market was simpler and production was labor-intensive, but it could not explain why useless luxury like diamonds were expensive, why essential goods like water were cheap. William Stanley Jevons shifted the focus to the consumer's point of view, arguing the value is subjective. It depends on how much satisfaction a person gets from one more unit of a good. This change recognized that value is not just about production, but about human preference, choice, and scarcity. Bringing balance. Marshall realized that neither supply nor demand alone could explain value completely. Instead, he built a balanced, two-sided model. Supply reflect cost and production condition, while demand reflect utility and consumer behavior. He united the objective world of Smith and the subjective world of Jevons into a coherent, unified theory of value. This synthesis marked the birth of modern microeconomics, giving economists tools to analyze everything from everyday pricing to complex market structure.